Say the name Louis Farrakhan, and the reaction is instant. For some, he is a powerful black nationalist religious leader. For many others, he is the man whose speeches are filled with anti-Semitic and racist rhetoric, condemned by groups that track extremist hate movements. Head of the Nation of Islam since the early 1980s, Farrakhan rebuilt an organization that mixes black separatism, apocalyptic theology, and strict discipline, and has been officially classified as a hate group by major watchdogs because of its anti-Semitism, homophobia, and anti-white bigotry. But behind the podium, the rallies, and the controversy, there is a very different arena where his ideas have had their most intimate impact: his own home. With his wife Khadija, he has spent more than 7 decades in a tightly knit marriage that produced 9 children and a sprawling network of grandchildren. A family that has been shaped, constrained, and sometimes scarred by their father's beliefs and battles. Louis Eugene Walcott, the violin-playing calypso singer from Boston who became Louis Farrakhan, leader of the reconstituted Nation of Islam, brought his children into a world where faith, race, discipline, and suspicion were constant themes. They grew up hearing stories of Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, watching their father fight to rebuild the NOI after it fractured in the 1970s, and seeing him organize the Million-Man March even as his speeches drew outrage for attacks on Jews, white people, and LGBTQ communities. In that atmosphere, 9 distinct lives took shape. The eldest son, Louis Farrakhan Jr., would work inside the Nation of Islam and then die suddenly in 2018, his funeral drawing followers from across the movement. Another son, Mustapha, would become supreme captain of the Fruit of Islam, the uniformed security and training wing of the NOI, his role symbolizing the physical enforcement of his father's message. A daughter, Donna, would take the pulpit herself, becoming one of the very few female ministers in the organization's history, while others, Betsy-Jean with her farm in Michigan, Fatima with her work as a registered nurse, Maria and Joshua in administration and community projects, tried to translate their father's rhetoric into everyday structures and services. Even on the edges of the family, the contradictions are clear. Some children have spent their adult lives defending and extending their father's teachings inside the Nation of Islam's institutions. Others have kept lower profiles, working in business, healthcare, or local initiatives. Their lives marked less by public speeches than by the quiet fact that their surname ties them forever to a man whose name is synonymous with both empowerment and hate. In this story, we will move from number 9 to number 1, tracing how each of Louis Farrakhan's 9 children, Betsy-Jean, Maria, Louis Jr., Mustapha, Joshua, Abnar, Donna, Fatima, and Khallada, has navigated the tension between inherited ideology and personal choice. Some have embraced his vision, some have tried to soften its edges in practice, and all of them have had to live in the double shadow of a father revered by followers and denounced by civil rights and anti-hate organizations. Number 9. Betsy-Jean Farrakhan. Number 9 is Betsy-Jean Farrakhan, the eldest daughter of Louis Farrakhan and the child whose life has unfolded the farthest from cameras, rallies, and the national controversies that define her father. While her siblings stepped into ministry, administration, or public leadership within the Nation of Islam, Betsy-Jean built a world anchored in land, labor, and quiet community life. She is the daughter who chose to stand at the edge of the movement rather than at its center. Yet her work still reflects the values Farrakhan has preached for decades: self-sufficiency, black economic independence, and the idea that salvation begins with food, soil, and discipline. Betsy-Jean's childhood, like that of all the Farrakhan children, unfolded inside the Nation of Islam's strict cultural structure. She grew up hearing Elijah Muhammad's teachings at the dinner table, listening to her father practice speeches that mixed theology with denunciations of oppression, and watching the Fruit of Islam guard the household during times of heightened security. But where some of her siblings internalized the militaristic posture or doctrinal zeal, Betsy-Jean gravitated toward practicality, the daily rhythms of service that hold communities together. The turning point in her adult life came when she moved to Michigan and established a farm that became both a livelihood and a mission. Through livestock programs, local sales, and educational outreach, she helped translate one of the NOI's most enduring messages into reality: that Black people should not rely on white-owned systems for food, land, or economic survival. Her farm work was not a symbolic gesture. It was labor-intensive, year-round, rooted in the belief that true independence requires control of the basics: water, soil, crops, livestock. This agricultural focus connected her to the older generations of Nation of Islam women who had been the backbone of community kitchens, clothing factories, and schools since the 1930s. Betsy-Jean revived that lineage in a modern way, giving the movement something it has often struggled to maintain: a space where doctrine becomes sustenance. Despite her distance from the podium, Betsy-Jean has remained tightly woven into family life. She has appeared at major Farrakhan family events, supported her siblings through internal transitions within the Nation of Islam, and served as one of the stabilizing figures in a family often pulled between global controversies and private crises. Her quiet loyalty reflects the Farrakhan household's internal code: family unity above public noise. Betsy-Jean Farrakhan's legacy is one of grounded activism. She represents the branch of the Farrakhan family that believes transformation does not always happen through speeches or confrontation, but through the everyday ability to feed, teach, and sustain people. Her life stands as a counterpoint to the fiery rhetoric that surrounds her father, a reminder that even in a movement built on provocative language, some of the most enduring work happens far from the microphone. Number 8. Maria Farrakhan Muhammad. Number 8 is Maria Farrakhan Muhammad, one of Louis Farrakhan's daughters whose life reflects the organizational heart of the Nation of Islam rather than its public spectacle. While some of her siblings stepped into commanding roles in security or ministry, Maria carved out her influence in administration, education, and the day-to-day machinery that keeps the NOI functioning. She became part of the quiet engine behind her father's movement, the internal infrastructure that rarely appears on stage, yet makes the onstage world possible. Maria grew up in the tightly structured Farrakhan household, where discipline was expected, modesty enforced, and loyalty to the Nation of Islam treated as both a spiritual mandate and a family obligation. From an early age, she gravitated toward roles that required attention to detail and emotional steadiness. In a family dominated by towering personalities, Farrakhan himself, the militaristic authority of the fruit of Islam, and the fiery oratory that filled mosques, Maria's temperament served a different purpose. She kept systems running. She handled logistics. She absorbed pressure quietly. Her turning point came as the Nation of Islam rebuilt itself under Farrakhan in the late 1970s and early 1980s. When the organization split after Elijah Muhammad's death, and Farrakhan began reconstituting a separate NOI with its original theology intact, the work was messy, political, and administratively demanding. Maria helped navigate that internal reconstruction. She became part of the small cadre of insiders who dealt with correspondence, records, staffing, and the coordination of ministries and community programs. In an organization structured around hierarchy and obedience, she earned her role through competence, not visibility. Maria's adult life continued along that path. She supported mosque operations in Chicago, contributed to educational programs, and worked to maintain the strict cultural expectations placed on women and families within the NOI. While she never became the public symbol that her father or some siblings were, her influence was felt in the consistency and stability of the institutions surrounding them. Her presence also mattered profoundly in the Farrakhan household. Maria served as one of the family members who mediated internal tensions, protected her mother, Khadija, from external pressures, and ensured continuity during moments of public controversy, of which there were many. Farrakhan's inflammatory rhetoric routinely sparked national outrage, often landing on the front pages of newspapers. In contrast, Maria tended to the world behind the headlines, the schoolrooms, administrative offices, and community programs that maintained order while the public storm raged. This is her quiet power, Maria represents the administrative backbone of a movement that has endured decades of internal ruptures and external condemnation. Without people like her, the fiery speeches would hang in the air and dissolve. She is the proof that movements do not live by rhetoric alone. They live by the invisible labor of those who organize the back offices, manage the correspondence, and steady the communal structure beneath the ideology. Mustafa Farrakhan Muhammad's legacy is one of discipline without spotlight. She shows that even in a movement defined by its public voice, some of the most consequential work is done by those who speak little, listen closely, and keep the machinery turning. Number 7. Louis Farrakhan Jr. Number 7 is Louis Farrakhan Jr. Born in 1958, the eldest son and, for many years, the natural heir apparent to the movement his father built. Unlike some of his siblings who gravitated toward administration, healthcare, or agriculture, Louis Jr. stepped directly into the world of mosque leadership, organizational oversight, and public representation. He was the Farrakhan child most visibly shaped by the doctrine, discipline, and expectation that defined life inside the Nation of Islam. Growing up as the son of Louis Farrakhan meant growing up in the eye of the storm. While other American children navigated school dances and playground politics, Louis Jr. was navigating Fruit of Islam drills, mosque etiquette, and the constant scrutiny that came with being the future male standard-bearer of a controversial national movement. His father's followers viewed him with reverence. Critics viewed him with suspicion before he ever spoke a word in public. The turning point in Louis Jr.'s life came in the 1980s and 1990s as he stepped into formal leadership positions within the NOI. He became known for his managerial style, measured, organized, and far less incendiary than his father's oratory. He traveled widely, represented the NOI in international and domestic settings, and worked as a bridge between Farrakhan's older, more militant followers and the younger generation, trying to find modern relevance within the movement. Yet Louis Jr.'s leadership was not merely symbolic. Internally, he became a stabilizing presence during moments when the organization faced financial strain, legal scrutiny, or public backlash. His siblings, particularly Mustapha and Donna, took on highly visible roles, but Louis Jr. was the one who often worked to steady the internal structure, cultivating a reputation for fairness and restraint, even when the Nation of Islam's public rhetoric reached its fiercest points. Then came the moment that reshaped his family. His sudden death in June 2018, at the age of 60, in Phoenix, Arizona. The shock reverberated across the Nation of Islam. For many followers, he had been the next generation's anchor. For his family, he was the dependable son, disciplined, loyal, quietly strong. His funeral drew ministers, Fruit of Islam captains, national representatives, and thousands of mourners. The Nation of Islam described his passing as losing a star of guidance. Louis Farrakhan himself delivered an emotional eulogy, speaking of the burden his son carried and the dignity with which he carried it. Beneath the theology, the grief was unmistakable. Louis Jr. had been the child who most absorbed his father's mission, and the one who died before his role could fully unfold. Louis Farrakhan Jr.'s legacy is continuity interrupted. He was the bridge between generations, the son who balanced devotion to doctrine with a temperament more measured than the leader who raised him. In a family defined by conflict with the outside world, he was the calm that held the inside together. His death left a quiet vacancy, the space where the next patriarch might have stood. Number 6. Mustafa Farrakhan. Number 6 is Mustafa Farrakhan, the son whose life most visibly embodies the Nation of Islam's structure of discipline, hierarchy, and security. While Louis Farrakhan Jr. served as the organizational diplomat, Mustapha became the enforcer, the supreme captain of the Fruit of Islam, FOI, the elite male security and training wing tasked with embodying the physical, moral, and martial dimensions of the movement. In a family where each child gravitated toward a different aspect of their father's empire, Mustapha became the one who stood closest to power, order, and command. From an early age, Mustapha was immersed in the NOI's militaristic culture. The FOI drills, the crisp uniforms, the posture of readiness. These were not abstract symbols, but the world he grew up inside. His father's sermons often invoked discipline as the highest virtue, and Mustapha absorbed that message with uncompromising seriousness. If Louis Jr. inherited the role of administrator, Mustapha inherited the role of protector. The turning point in his life came when he rose to the post of Supreme Captain, the highest-ranking position within the FOI. This role placed him at the center of the Nation of Islam's internal machinery. He oversaw security details for major events, including Farrakhan's most high-profile speeches. He commanded FOI units across the country. He shaped the organization's standards of conduct for men, and he enforced loyalty at a level that made him both respected and feared. The FOI, under Mustapha's leadership, became known for its strict code, impeccable grooming, absolute obedience, physical rigor, and ideological purity. In a movement defined by separation from mainstream American culture, Mustapha's FOI stood as the sharpest visual symbol of that separation. Rows of disciplined men presenting order in a world the NOI framed as chaotic, corrupt, and hostile. His presence alongside his father also carried symbolic weight. Mustapha was often positioned near Farrakhan on stage, serving as the visible reminder that the NOI does not merely preach order, it enforces it. Within the family, he became the primary executor of the elder Farrakhan's security philosophy, ensuring that threats, real or perceived, were neutralized quickly and quietly. Mustapha's adult life also includes service outside the mosque. He has worked in public safety and emergency response roles, reflecting a dual identity, one part rooted in NOI paramilitary structure, the other connected to broader civic responsibility. This blending of worlds, however rare within the Farrakhan household, underscores the seriousness with which he approaches discipline as a life's calling. As Louis Farrakhan ages and succession questions grow more urgent, many observers believe Mustapha will play a pivotal internal role, not necessarily as the next national minister, but as the guardian of institutional continuity, the one who ensures the FOI remains the backbone of the movement regardless of who eventually leads it. Mustafa Farrakhan's legacy is order personified. He represents the hard edge of the Nation of Islam, the discipline, the enforcement, the uncompromising structure that turns ideology into lived reality. If Farrakhan's voice is the movement's fire, Mustapha is its steel. Number 5. Joshua Farrakhan. Number 5 is Joshua Farrakhan, a son whose life has unfolded in the borderlands of the Nation of Islam. Close enough to be shaped by his father's doctrine, yet distant enough to carve out a trajectory less defined by formal hierarchy. Joshua is neither the administrator like Louis Jr., nor the enforcer like Mustapha, nor the preacher like Donna. Instead, he became something more ambiguous, more fluid, a messenger, a connector, a man who carries the Farrakhan name into community spaces where his father's harsh rhetoric softens into everyday ministry. Joshua grew up inside the intense structure of the Farrakhan household, where ideological discipline was reinforced daily and where children were taught that they were not merely a family, but the inner circle of a movement. Like his siblings, he attended NOI schools, where he memorized lessons on self-sufficiency, black identity, and the threat of outside influence. But Joshua was always different, more introspective, more relational, less drawn to strict hierarchy and more drawn to people. The turning point in his public life came when he began appearing alongside his father at Nation of Islam events, often delivering opening remarks or serving as the bridge between the national leadership and the local membership. He became known for a tone notably gentler than Louis Farrakhan's, a tone that emphasized guidance rather than confrontation, community uplift rather than denunciation. Joshua's work frequently placed him in front of youth audiences, where the sharp edges of NO ideology were often replaced with messages about discipline, education, and resisting destructive behavior. While the broader Nation of Islam remained a controversial organization known for anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, and separatist theology, Joshua's presence sometimes functioned as a local corrective, He focused on the human element, the lived experience of black families trying to survive in urban America. Yet Joshua never broke from the doctrine. He spoke often about the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, the importance of moral development and the spiritual leadership of his father. He did not soften the message. He simply delivered it in a voice that carried less fire and more warmth. Inside the movement, this made him an effective intermediary, someone who could connect with NOI members who struggled under the rigidity of the organization, but remained loyal to the mission. His adult life has also included administrative and community roles within the NOI, though he has remained less formally positioned than his brothers. Unlike Mustapha, he does not command. Unlike Louis Jr., he did not become an executive anchor. Instead, Joshua built his influence through relationships, personal connections, mentorship, and the trust of local members. In a family where each child represents a different facet of their father's legacy, Joshua stands as the embodiment of accessible leadership. He reflects the attempt to translate Farrakhan's polarizing doctrine into daily guidance for ordinary people. If Mustapha is the steel of the movement, Joshua is its hand extended, firm, ideological, but human. Number 4. Abnar Farrakhan. Number 4 is Abnar Farrakhan, the son who lived closest to the Nation of Islam's lived discipline, but furthest from its public spotlight. Among Louis Farrakhan's children, Abnar is often the least discussed in the media. Yet inside the Farrakhan household and within NOI circles, he holds a distinct place. The quiet disciplinarian, the steady executor of internal expectations. The son whose loyalty was expressed not through titles or speeches, but through meticulous daily obedience to the structure his father built. Abnar grew up in the same rigorous environment as his brothers: early morning study, strict dietary laws, martial training through the fruit of Islam, and an upbringing shaped by distrust of outside institutions. But unlike Louis Jr., who became a public representative, or Mustapha, who rose through official ranks, Abnar chose a more interior path. He embraced discipline as a personal ethic rather than a public role. People who encountered him within the Nation of Islam often described him as serious, concise, and unwavering. A man who believed that the path to community uplift began with individual order. He was not the sibling who addressed conventions or managed bureaucratic systems. He was the one who quietly ensured that the standards of the movement were upheld in practice. The turning point in Abnar's journey came in the 1980s and 1990s, when the Nation of Islam underwent major internal transitions, expansion into new cities, doctrinal consolidation, increased public scrutiny, and the restructuring of ministries and classes. At a time when the NOI needed consistency at its foundation, Abnar became part of the stabilizing core. He taught, trained, corrected, and reinforced. Without his work, the organization's internal life, from mosque behavior to gendered expectations, would have been far less cohesive. Even outside strictly religious roles, Abnar embodied the NOI's values. His personal life reflected the movement's emphasis on sobriety, righteousness, and community building. He was part of the cultural fabric of the Farrakhan home, the son who kept routines intact, who supported his parents' expectations, who resisted the temptations of public notoriety that often distort the children of powerful figures. Abnar's adult years continued this pattern. He engaged in community programs linked to the NOI, contributed to youth mentoring, and maintained a consistent presence at internal gatherings. He rarely appeared in national coverage, not because his role was minor, but because his contribution took place in the hidden architecture of the movement, the space where discipline becomes identity. In the Farrakhan family constellation, Abnar represents the quiet spine. He is the child who demonstrates how a movement founded on absolutist moral codes depends on people willing to enforce those codes, not with spectacle, but with steadiness. His life is the reminder that institutions survive not only through leaders on the stage, but through those who absorb the weight of daily, unseen responsibility. Abnar Farrakhan's legacy is internal strength, the power that emerges not through public acclaim, but through unwavering dedication to the demands of a controversial, disciplined, and insular world. Number 3. Donna Farrakhan Muhammad. Number 3 is Donna Farrakhan Muhammad, the daughter who stepped into a space that for most of the Nation of Islam's history simply did not exist for women: the pulpit. While Louis Farrakhan's sons inherited roles in administration, discipline, and structural leadership, Donna inherited something far rarer: her father's fire, his cadence, his ability to command a room with conviction. She became one of the first prominent female ministers within the NOI, challenging internal norms even as she reinforced the theological foundation laid by her father. Donna grew up within the strict gender order of the Nation of Islam. Women were expected to be modest, obedient, supportive, the anchors of domestic stability and moral discipline. Yet from an early age, Donna showed the signs of a different calling. She had presence, she had authority. She had the kind of vocal clarity and emotional control that the NOI typically reserved for men. In a movement built on hierarchy, she was an exception written into the structure by sheer force of personality. The turning point came when her father gave her his public blessing to teach and minister. This was more than permission. It was a signal to the entire Nation of Islam that Donna was to be heard. She began speaking at NOI conventions, women's classes, youth gatherings, and mosque events, drawing crowds who recognized in her the unmistakable rhythm and gravity of her father's oratory style. Her sermons blended the traditional NOI message: self-discipline, modesty, black identity, divine mission, with an emphasis on female empowerment that existed within the confines of doctrine, but pushed against cultural expectation. She did not challenge the structure. She expanded its possibilities. In a movement often criticized for rigid gender roles, Donna represented a controlled evolution. A woman who upheld the teachings, but delivered them with a voice that demanded recognition. Donna's adult life has included leadership roles within the NOI's women's ministry, educational programs, marriage counseling initiatives, and community outreach. She has guided young women in understanding their place within a movement often defined by male authority, emphasizing dignity, purpose, and the moral expectations that accompany Nation of Islam womanhood. Her influence also extends into ceremonial and administrative spaces: weddings, funerals, intercommunity partnerships, where her presence signals both continuity and change. But perhaps her most significant legacy lies within the Farrakhan family itself. Donna has often acted as one of the emotional mediators, bridging the gap between the rigid expectations of her brother's roles and the more relational, internal dynamics that sustain family unity. In public, she is the minister. In private, she is the daughter who understands how to translate her father's ideology into human terms. Donna Farrakhan. Muhammad's legacy is voice, not merely the sound of it, but the authority behind it. She stands as a testament to the complicated, evolving world of the Nation of Islam, where doctrine meets gender, tradition meets adaptation, and a daughter can become both the reflection and refinement of her father's message. Number 2. Fatimah Farrakhan Muhammad. Number 2 is Fatimah Farrakhan Muhammad, the daughter whose life bridges two worlds that rarely meet inside the Nation of Islam: the world of doctrinal discipline and the world of practical service. While Donna became the female minister and Mustapha the enforcer, Fatima became the healer, a registered nurse and health advocate whose career reflects a quieter, steadier expression of her family's values. If her father preaches moral purification and community uplift from the lectern, Fatima enacts those ideals in hospital rooms, clinics, and caregiving circles. Fatima grew up with the same strict expectations as her sisters: modest dress, structured routines, controlled education, and unwavering loyalty to the Nation of Islam. Yet even as a child, she displayed an instinct for calm, patient care, a temperament very different from the fiery energy that defined her father's public persona. While some siblings approached ideology through leadership or enforcement, Fatima approached it through service. Her turning point came when she entered nursing. In a movement that often frames health in spiritual terms, cleanliness, discipline, dietary law, abstention from harmful substances, Fatima expanded those teachings into the medical realm. She trained, certified, and ultimately became a registered nurse, stepping into a field where compassion must be matched by scientific rigor. This path placed her at a unique crossroads. She remained deeply rooted in Nation of Islam values, but she also operated daily inside secular institutions, caring for people of all backgrounds. Within the NOI community, Fatima's medical expertise became invaluable. Health has always occupied a central place in the movement, from Elijah Muhammad's strict dietary codes to Farrakhan's emphasis on bodily discipline. Fatima helped translate those teachings into practical guidance. Preventive care, medical literacy, maternal health support, and emotional resilience. She became the kind of presence rarely discussed in headlines, but always essential inside religious movements. The one who tends to the body, while others tend to the ideology. Her influence extended beyond clinical spaces. Fatima often participated in NOI women's classes, offering guidance on family health, nutrition, child rearing, and emotional well-being. She supported community outreach initiatives, assisted with family-related events, and served as a stabilizing presence during moments of public controversy surrounding her father. When Farrakhan's rhetoric drew national condemnation, Fatima kept working, in hospitals and neighborhoods, in the background, where real life unfolds far from political noise. In the Farrakhan household, she became known as a caretaker not only by profession, but by nature. She helped aging relatives, supported siblings through personal crises, and grounded the family's internal dynamics with her measured temperament. Her life became a reminder that not every legacy is built from leadership or oratory. Some are built from presence, constancy, and care. Fatima Farrakhan Muhammad's legacy is service as doctrine. She represents the dimension of the Farrakhan family that prioritizes healing over confrontation, practical help over public performance. In a movement defined by fiery speeches and ideological conflict, Fatima is the counterbalance. The daughter who chose to heal rather than proclaim, to support rather than command, and to live her faith through the simplest and most radical act of all: taking care of people. Number 1. Khaleda Farrakhan Muhammad. Number 1 is Khaleda Farrakhan Muhammad, the daughter whose life stands at the intersection of discipline, devotion, and the deeply private dimension of the Farrakhan household. Of all Louis Farrakhan's children, Khallada is the most shielded, the most carefully kept behind the walls of the family's inner world. Yet within the Nation of Islam, her name carries unmistakable weight. She is one of the quiet architects of women's instruction, moral guidance, and the domestic culture that sustains the NOI from within. Khaleda grew up under the strictest interpretation of Nation of Islam teachings on womanhood. Where Donna moved into the pulpit, Khaleda moved into the realm that Elijah Muhammad, wife of Elijah Muhammad, once shaped: education, etiquette, family development, and the cultivation of the movement's internal moral order. She was the daughter entrusted with upholding the feminine blueprint of the NOI. The turning point in Khaleda's life came as the Nation of Islam expanded in the 1980s and 1990s, attracting thousands of new female members seeking structure, identity, and spiritual direction. The MGT and GCC, the NOI Women's Training Division, grew rapidly, and Farrakhan needed trusted teachers who could transmit doctrine with precision and authority. Khaleda became one of those teachers. Her role was not theatrical, nor was it meant to be. She instructed women and girls in modesty, household management, moral discipline, self-defense, child-rearing, and the theological expectations of Nation of Islam womanhood. Inside this world, Khallada became a figure of consistency, the woman who helped preserve the exacting standards her father preached. She did not innovate. She guarded. She ensured that the next generation of NOI women understood their duties as Farrakhan defined them. her influence extended beyond the classroom. Within the Farrakhan family, Khaleda became one of the stabilizing presences. A daughter who helped maintain the household's order, care for the children of her siblings, and keep the family aligned during moments of controversy or external pressure. Whenever public backlash targeted her father, whether for anti-Semitic statements, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, or political feuds, Khaleda remained rooted, continuing her internal work without wavering. She also played a significant role in shaping female participation at major NOI events, ensuring that the MGT and GCC's presentation matched the movement's strict standards of discipline and modesty. Whether preparing delegations for Savior's Day conventions or coordinating women's classes at regional mosques, Khallada was part of the invisible infrastructure behind the organization's polished public rituals. Abnar Farrakhan Muhammad's legacy is continuity. The preservation of doctrine through the private lives of families, the shaping of culture through instruction, and the transmission of ideology not through microphones but through daily routines. If Farrakhan is the voice of the movement, and Mustapha its steel, and Donna its female voice, Khaleda is the keeper of the pattern. She ensures the movement reproduces itself from one generation of women to the next. Her life is not public. Her influence is not flashy. But within the insular world of the Nation of Islam, Khaleda represents the essential truth that every ideology survives not by its leaders alone, but by the quiet labor of those who teach, structure, and enforce its culture from within. To understand Louis Farrakhan's legacy, one must look far beyond the podiums, the rallies, the controversies, and the condemnations. His public life, marked by fiery oratory, racial separatism, anti-Semitism, and moments of historic mobilization like the Million Man March, has been analyzed endlessly. But the deeper, more revealing story lies in the 9 lives that grew up inside the ideology he preached. His children. They did not choose the Nation of Islam. They inherited it. And through them, the public shadow of Louis Farrakhan becomes a human narrative, complex, fractured, and fiercely shaped by the moral architecture he built within his home. Betsy-Jean, the eldest daughter, carried Farrakhan's doctrine into the soil. Her farm work in Michigan reflects the NOI's oldest teaching. Independence begins with land, food, and discipline. She represents the practicality needed to make separatist ideology physically livable. Maria, the quiet administrator, became part of the movement's hidden engine. She represents the unseen labor of the NOI, the paperwork, the scheduling, the organizational heartbeat that allows her father's fiery words to solidify into structure. Louis Jr., the steady heir, embodied continuity until his sudden death cut short a life defined by loyalty and restraint. He was the son who stood closest to leadership, the bridge between an older generation and the next. A promise interrupted. Mustapha, the supreme captain, is the movement's steel spine. He enforces what Farrakhan proclaims, turning doctrine into order. In him, the militaristic culture of the NOI finds its clearest expression. Joshua, the connector, represents the human face of the movement, the soft-spoken messenger who interprets ideology for everyday people, translating rigidity into guidance. Abnar, the quiet disciplinarian, is the keeper of internal standards. He ensures continuity from within, preserving the NOI not through visibility, but through steadiness. Donna, the minister, transformed exception into precedent. In a male-dominated structure, she became a woman whose voice carried the authority of her father's. Proof that influence within the NOI can evolve, even within strict doctrine. Fatima, the healer, wove doctrine into care. As a registered nurse, she grounded NOI teachings in the realities of medical service, reminding the movement that bodies require compassion, not only discipline. And finally, Khaleda, the guardian of feminine order, ensures that the cultural blueprint of the Nation of Islam reproduces itself through generations of girls and women, the quiet architect of domestic continuity. Together, these 9 stories reveal a truth often hidden behind the controversies that define Louis Farrakhan's public image. His ideological world did not simply shape a movement. It shaped a family system, one that demanded discipline, loyalty, and alignment from every child born into it. Some embraced the doctrine fully. Some softened its edges. Some carried its burdens until it consumed them. But all 9 children lived in the long wake of a father whose influence has reached from Southside Chicago mosques to the highest levels of American political debate, and whose shadow followed them into every room they entered. In the end, the legacy of Louis Farrakhan is not only the movement he built, or the hatred he provoked, or the empowerment he inspired. It is also the constellation of 9 lives, diverse, disciplined, conflicting, intertwined, that reveal the human cost and human complexity behind one of the most polarizing figures in modern American history.